Good evening or good morning, everybody, depending on where in the world you're living in. If you're like myself, living over in the Pacific, over in Japan and Australia, you'll be saying good morning. And if you're over in American Europe, you'll be saying good evening. Good evening, lads. How are you keeping? How's your evening going
Grand. It's a bit
over
stormy.
in Europe,
A bit
America?
stormy.
It's very,
Stormy?
very stormy in Ulster. So if I cut out, it's just because of that.
Is it that bad over there, lads?
Yeah. Well, where I am, it's bad.
I'm
Like,
I'm
Yeah.
in Dublin, and here for since I live in Kerry here, it's just slightly blustery. But I think all
Mm.
the Dublin people are going, "Oh my God, it's terrible."
well, I live on a small peninsula that's like 3 miles wide, and I've got the loch
Yeah,
on one side and the Irish Sea on the other. So
Mm.
yeah, I think we get it from both sides. To be fair, like
Mm. Fair enough. And it is Easter weekend. Do you have all your Slaughter lads? How you
every
keeping?
now and again.
How's the boys doing?
Oh,
How's Dennis this
I,
morning?
I forgot to put chat
Boys
on.
jumping around with us. Oh,
yeah, me too.
I am there turning everything on right now. To be honest with you, because I literally just connected everything up and just going around turning on the monetization everything right now.
Oh yeah, I have
How's
to do that.
Dennis keeping?
Hi,
How's
Dennis.
Kevin?
Hi, Cleveland. Storm Dave.
And
Yeah, that's the guy.
Is that the name of it, Storm Dave? Well, Dave stopped
Yeah,
my kids from doing an Easter egg hunt today, so
all
yes.
right.
I think Storm Dave is a funny name for a storm.
Hmm.
It's,
Think they've given up at that stage, did they?
well, they cancelled it. They cancelled it was up in a place called Bangor in North
Mm.
Down, and everyone just got a sort of message on Facebook saying it's cancelled. And to be fair, it was the right call because it was pretty bad. Like it still
Yeah.
is, but.
Mm.
But they killed my day, so I had no idea what to do with the kids all day. So it's just been me and the three boys, just stuck in this little house.
Oh, poor lads.
I'm feeling very 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 drained right now.
Mm. Yeah,
I
that's
know
it.
the
All right.
feeling.
And Owen, how's your weekend going?
Well, it's the weekend. I've been in the medical places all week, so it's going
Mm.
okay. I'm going back to Kerry tomorrow for a rest.
Aye,
Yay!
good. Did you buy any Easter eggs, Owen?
No, but my wife
No.
probably did. I hope.
It's funny because allegedly, according to, well, at least in medieval Europe, but supposedly in medieval Ireland as well, because during the 40 days of Lent, you weren't allowed to eat any eggs or meat during those days. You would have a build-up of both rabbit, chicken, and also the eggs. But supposedly in medieval Ireland, I don't know how true it is. You guys can correct me about this one, but the children were left to protect the eggs during those 40 days. And during those 40 days, and supposedly it comes over from both Persia, did this, what was it, tradition comes over from Persia. The Christians of Persia, believe it or not, there are Christians who live in Persia and the Christians who live in East, was it Egypt? They used to decorate the eggs, and that culture slowly but surely brought its way over to Ireland during the High Middle Ages, around the 13th century. This culture was brought over, and so the children would gather up all the eggs and used to paint them and decorate them and stuff. Myself and Rachel were talking about it and very much debating it, because it's like, okay, so where did they have the paints from? So myself and Rachel are still debating it. It was just something a fun fact we saw online. But how credible it is in Ireland is still debated by myself and Rachel for sure. But supposedly were doing it in Persia and Egypt during the medieval period. Michal, Owen, what's your interpretation of
I'm
decorating Easter eggs during the medieval period?
I'm very dubious. I'm very dubious.
Mm,
I have to say. And I think they just people abstain from meat. I
mm,
haven't heard of abstaining from eggs.
mm. And I suppose
Um,
you're the same as well, Michal, are you? You're very
Well,
questionable about that.
well, even the meat thing I question as well, because the monasteries of Tala, where monks are actually, they were ordinarily vegetarian. They lived on bread and water, and the
Yeah.
entire community is still advised to eat small pieces of meat in Easter. So, and also the text like Betu Padrig,
Yeah.
that the tripolite of life of St. Patrick. It says about the consumption of a hort of meat accompanied with a pitcher of beer at Easter. So I think
Well,
really,
that's Easter Day itself, is it though?
I don't know. I can only, I don't,
Right.
that's what I mean. When I
It
read
would
this,
it would be, because Lent is Lent, Easter
Mm,
is Easter Sunday, stretching it perhaps to Good Friday and perhaps to Easter week. But when they say
mm.
Easter, they mean the Paschal Easter, sort of the rising from the dead, not Lent. Lent is something different.
Mm,
And my theological history is a bit out
mm.
of date, so I don't know when the idea of 40 days of fasting came in. I
Yeah.
know in early medieval, in early modern, it had come in.
Mm,
Uh, and then I expect there were people who you were supposed to not eat for 40 meat for 40 days. I'm
mm.
sure that if people had it, they would have had a nibble. So
Yeah.
just quickly, just hi Kat, hi Tom, hi Derek, hi Jim. Just welcome into the
hi, Kira
domain.
from Wet, Mayo. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, I like to say my theological sort of teachings, sort of stopped at primary school. So I've never really attended anything religious since I was a nipper. So, yeah. So whenever I read it,
Mm.
in sort of preparation, I was a bit. I didn't. I just saw Easter and was like, well, it could be.
Oh, Kevin, what was it called? Mihal's broke up
The
slightly. Oh no,
churches.
he's back again.
Back.
Yeah, it will dip. It will dip. Just for tell me to like I say, the signal here is really bad with the storm at the minute, but
Uh,
it shouldn't cut out completely. But yeah, in the Ulster churches, a lot of them were sort of fiercely loyal to Columbanus' sort of monasteries, their
mm,
traditions, and they defended the Celtic dating. Um,
mm,
you know, while that famous synod in Whitby in 664 kind of resolved the issue, um,
mm.
there were still these sort of rogue elements. So again, I suppose that can really confuse the whole dating um, of when you're trying to read up stuff like this last minute.
It's always the case. Um, Yeah, the Synod of Whitby, you brought that up there, and that's a really interesting one. I know Mihal, what was it called? Dr. Owen O'Neill wants to go into further detail about the Synod of Whitby, but it's always, what was it called? Something causes massive clash and arguments every single time. For anyone who doesn't know about the Synod of Whitby, it was basically, and we're going to go into further detail about this because this is kind of an argument myself and Owen want to have a further detail about anyway. Basically, at the end of, what was it? Not even at the end, but around the 5th century, with the arrival of St. Patrick onto the island of Ireland and him bringing Christianity over. And obviously, there's other players inside there as well, like the likes of St. Palladius. Ireland was allowed to it wasn't allowed, it kind of had no choice but to develop its own interpretation of Christianity. Now, at saying that, it didn't turn around one day and says, okay, we're going to make our own, independent form of Christianity. It kind of had no choice with the fall of the Roman Empire. And so, because they had their own interpretation of Christianity, it was different to the Roman Christianity. And so, when the lights slowly started to turn on, and you have characters like Saint Columbanus making their way over to Rome. He made it as far as Milan and then started writing letters over to the papacy, which still survive today. They discovered that their Christianity was different to the Christianity of Rome. And so what happened is that Ireland, with its insular Christianity, also known from the pop history side of things as Celtic Christianity, had a different date for Easter, different to Rome. And instead of turning around and just accepting it, what happened is that Armagh stuck, stubbornly to its interpretation because it believed it was correct. And on the flip side of things, Rome accepted Alexandria in Egypt, his interpretation of the date of what was Easter. And so what we ended up having was a huge argument between Rome and Ireland, which was eventually brought up at the Synod of Whitby in 664. Yeah, 664.
But to add to
AD.
that, Iona didn't obviously still conform to Roman Easter until 716. So even after Whitby, they still.
Oh, he's gone.
Yeah, he's
Which
coming in and out.
Owen will dismantle that in a second. But Adam
Right.
has said there about, if you look back at history, we read about Vikings, Scots, and then after a couple of years, English missionaries came. Actually, we have a long connection with monastics and priests from Anglo-Saxons. There was an Anglo-Saxon monastery set up in Connacht. And I think it was around Roscommon. And then obviously we have connections with Lindisfarne and Northumbria, even a king. I can't remember the Anglo-Saxons' names, a king, but very briefly, Northumbria sort of national religion, shall we just say, was Celtic Christianity before he was deposed by, I believe, a cousin or a son and a nephew or something like that. But so we have a long connection with the British Isles or the Britain.
One thing, just while since we lost him again. Oh, you're back.
Yeah. Like I say, it'll only be a second or two. But yeah, long connections of cross community working together. So yeah, it's not as dry cut as these sort of invasion groups sort of imposing their belief systems on us. It's a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, I just like, first of all, I hate the term Celtic Christianity. I'll come back to that.
Yeah,
but
yeah, go on.
We all do.
In relation,
it's a pop term, like,
Yeah,
go on.
Yeah. In relation to Synod of Whitby, it's not that there always was a Roman Catholic or a mainstream dating of Easter. There were many datings of Easter.
Yeah.
Because Easter starts off, if you actually read the Bible, from my last religion class would have been 1985. So the Holy Week is set. It's set during Jewish Passover. So Easter, if you look at it, coincides with the Jewish Passover.
Yeah.
When the Catholic Church becomes an official church, the official Church of Rome, there are, if you look at it, there are lots of different calculations. And first of all, the church says, "Oh, this is a bit of a awkward thing having Easter the same time as Passover. We can't have it at the same time.
Yeah.
Let's change it." And everyone says fine, but it's extremely difficult because dating Passover, I don't know how it's dated, but it's got something to do with full moons, with the moons. So they have to date Easter, and you have a version in Alexandria, you have another version in Rome, and then another version in Rome, and then another version in Rome. I think the official Roman one only starts in the 6th century. And then the Irish monks kind of I think they had less to do, less politicking than the ones in Rome. They sit down and they calculate scientifically, as much as you can use the word scientifically in those days, and
Mm,
say this is the actual date of Easter. And
mm,
like I've read a lot about it, and it is it's bloody complicated, and I don't
mm.
understand it, but I think probably the Irish monks were more correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
it
set
was Dr. Damon Bracken. That's his field, and he said it was correct for them. Sorry, Miho, what were
yes,
you saying?
no, yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, I can hear you.
No, no. I thought I still had it on mute. Yeah. It was something to do. It was an older 84-year cycle for Easter with the
Mm,
Irish version. But it's funny you're saying about the Rome arguing. It was actually the Bishop of Paris at Whitby who was pushing for um the more Romanized standard, and it was Bishop Coleman of Lindisfarne who was arguing for the Irish sort of calendar, and
mm,
actually he resigns rather than conforming after the
mm.
Synod of Whitby. He decides that he won't conform with the Roman sort of. It just came to me when I was talking about Lindisfarne earlier. I could not remember the guy. So yeah, but Coleman was the Bishop of Lindisfarne, um,
Mm,
and yeah. So again, it's just uh, um, shows the sort of who's involved in that synod, um,
mm,
and who's pushing for what. So, and then I believe that's the individual when he resigns. It's a Saxon bishop who's put in place,
yeah,
and that's when they start to go back to the original sort of Roman standard. Um, but yeah, like I said, but even then, Iona still held out for another, well, at 664. I can't do the math, but seven
yeah.
sixteens when they
But
happy Easter. So,
I think one thing that gets forgotten a lot when people talk about Celtic Christianity, Synod of Whitby, is
mm,
that the Catholic Church is extremely good as portraying itself as a unitary church. That's what the name Catholic
mm.
means.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at it, if you dig deep, the
Mm,
Catholic Church includes a huge range of churches. I was in Brussels many years ago, and I walked into this church. We were just exploring, and I thought that I had walked into an Orthodox church, but my
mm,
cousin who lives in Brussels said, no, no, um, it is some church that follows. It comes under the umbrella of the Catholic Church, but it looks Orthodox, and its churches are Orthodox. The
mm,
Armenian Church, which is it's probably the oldest Christian church, I think, in terms of that has continued on,
mm,
comes under the Catholic Church. But if an Irish person wanders into an Armenian mass, they're probably saying, "What the hell is going on?"
mm.
Um, sort of, I'm not sure where the I think probably the one in Ethiopia. I think that's Orthodox, the
Yeah.
Ethiopian church. So, but the Catholic Church covers loads and loads and loads of things.
Mm,
You, from what I understand, a Christian church, as long as it accepts some basic stuff, such as the big guy on earth,
yeah.
some other things, they can operate the way they want. The Catholic
Mm,
Church has been very, very good at that.
yeah.
Except if you jump to the time of the Synod of Whitby, there's also
Mm,
some politics going on.
yeah.
And that's what gets me about the term of the Celtic Christianity.
Mm.
Um,
well,
I don't
that's
know if
it.
you want to
No,
go
because
on
you're
to
right.
that now or wait a bit.
Yeah, no,
Well, it was sorry for cutting in there, Mihal, but the important thing, and it was Dr. Damien Bracken who always brought it up, was the letter that Saint Columbanus had written to the Pope in Milan. Just around, I think it's 604, he writes a letter. He goes all the way from Ireland, Bangor, wasn't it? He went from Bangor all the way down to Milan, and then he wrote a letter to the Pope from Milan to Rome. And in the letter, it's a big, massive letter. You can read it online. And in it, he says that Ireland is although it has its own interpretation, he basically says it still drinks from the what was it called? The source of the water, basically saying, hey, look, we're not a completely different religion. We're still Christians. We're not pagan. We're not anything else. We're still pagans, and we still drink from the source of the water, because at the time they didn't have terms such as Roman Christianity or Celtic Christianity. To them, they were all Christians. And so when he's saying we all drink from the source of the water, he's basically saying, hey, look, from a modern interpretation, he's saying that we're all Roman Christians here. In Ireland, we don't recognize ourselves as anything else. So, yeah, I completely agree with you. The reason why today, the terms Celtic Christianity or insular Christianity, they're all modern terms to basically simplify the conversation when we're studying things, the differences such as in haircuts or in what was it called? The dating of Easter. They're all kind of insular interpretations that we got because of that development we had from the arrival of St. Patrick around 436, going all the way up to around 604. And even a little bit further still up to the 12th century, because of the fact that we, can't go on a phone call and say, hey, Pope, what are we doing today? It's not until we start having the reforms of the church in the 12th century that everyone starts to align themselves with what's going on with the papacy inside of Rome.
Yeah. Yeah, the church in Ireland has always been, I think Tom there he says, I'm a Maronite, we're in communion with the Pope. The Irish church was always in communion with the Pope. The idea of Celtic Christianity really only dates from the Reformation for two reasons. First of all, you have Calvinists, especially in Scotland. They have this idea, the Irish church way back when under St. Patrick, etc., was Calvinistic, was Protestant. Then it got corrupted, and got brought under Rome. And now with the Reformation, we're returning it to its true thing. And this has somehow stuck in different ways. It's gone through different things. And then on the other hand, there were many Scots Catholics. And like in the beginning of the 17th century, many of these had fled to Spain or Spanish lands, and they were competing with Irish for funds and for help from Spain. And there was essentially a religious sort of historical religious / political fight between Scottish Catholics and Irish Catholics in Spanish lands over history. So that there was a monk a Protestant, Catholic Scottish monk, who kind of wrote this book in which he takes Irish people and makes them into Scots. And then that's the date of Celtic Christianity starts then. If you went back in a time machine to the 7th or 8th century and start talking about Celtic Christianity, people would just, first of all, they wouldn't know the word Celtic.
Of course.
Like, they would just look at you and, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
I just quickly, I'll just say hi. Welcome in 1690, Yogi. Who else was I saw there? Caveman, welcome back. I did actually see your message and I meant to reply back to it. Welcome back from your walk that you took taken part in. I hope it went well. And Fat Controller, welcome back as well. But I just want to, Dennis was saying, in medieval Ireland, would things calm down at Easter, or were there still battle raids? Maybe it's hard to know, just wondering how much they believe in the faith. I just want to start this off with the Battle of Clontarf fought on Good Friday.
Yeah, it is. It is. They rushed that one, didn't they? Because of the fact that, go on there.
No, I was just saying that. Yeah, I don't know what bit you followed in after us to step in that wee jitter, but yeah, the Battle of Clontarf fought on Good Friday. So, and the Anglo-Normans advanced on Limerick in Easter in 1176. So I would say there's probably plenty of records of. There's obviously this argument that it's got to be. It's going to be a holy day, but troops land up when they land up. If you get slowed down, or if you're trying to take people by surprise, like the Clonard Monastery was burned on Easter night. Knock
Oh, he's gone again, is he?
The Battle of Knock Cosgrave was fought in 1464 on Easter Tuesday. So yeah, there's plenty of examples of religious days being used for battles.
Yeah, it is funny because you would assume the Irish should be very good and strict and take those holy days very seriously. But actually, when looking at the sources from my interpretation, even Christmas doesn't seem to be taken seriously by the Irish, where you'd have them going around collecting the cattle tributes during Christmas. And yet, it seems to be a show of force on Christmas in the dead of winter if somebody wasn't paying their full tribute around Christmas, New Year, to suddenly pop up and attack their settlement on Christmas Day for that cattle tribute. Owen, what's your interpretation of what's it called? The various Tuat attacking each other on holy days.
You'll find that all across the world, all across, like there's in the First World War. There's in 1914, some soldiers, I think English and German especially, I'm not sure about the French, spontaneously start singing carols or something to each other. And then the higher ups go, stop that, kill them. No, you cannot be playing football if that happened. You cannot be stopping to fight today. There are many sieges, for example, that go on for many months and sometimes years. A siege would not stop for Christmas, would not stop for Easter. And sometimes, I'm sure if you look through medieval history, you're going to find a record of a battle that took place on a holy day, and one side all got communion and they got fired up by a priest, etc. And then on the other hand, in many places, people they would kind of go to mass once a year, if even that. It's only with the Reformation that first of all the Protestant churches start constantly, you have to go to mass, so they don't use the word mass. You have to celebrate, you have to follow this thing very strictly. And then the Council of Trent brings in something. I think since the Council of Trent, a Catholic theoretically has to go to mass once a year. Sort of, it's good. Like, there would have been some priests, most of them, especially in Gaelic Ireland, would have been, let's say, traveling priests. Though from like the 14th century on, there's more monasteries being established. And if you were a lord, you would have access to priests and you would go to mass more regularly. But it would have been difficult to stop everything to celebrate mass, etc. If you were in a big city where there is if you go to Spain or Portugal now and Italy, they have these religious processions and stuff like that. Someone there mentioned they're a Maronite Christian. I'm sure some of them have very old traditions that they still celebrate on certain days. But at the same time, other things continue. Normal business continues.
Yeah, like I say, 789, when Clonard's burned on Easter night, and they take the relic of the staff of Jesus. It's there. I mean, you don't get more sacrilege on such a day that for it to actually happen. So yeah, like you say, I think war and practicality sort of get in the way, and religion sort of put to the side until later, and then they can confess about it later. It's that famous joke, isn't it? I was a Protestant.
Yeah, it's very interesting because although we do have meetings that happen everyone at least 4 times a year within Celtic society or Irish society, so on and so forth. Those monastic settlements are quite interesting in the early medieval period because of the fact that they're just those churches, monastic settlements, they're so small in the early medieval period. It's not until we go into the High Middle Ages and what was it called? Construction with Romanesque style comes into Ireland around the 12th century with the likes of Cormac's Chapel. The churches start to get much more bigger, like we have here with the Rock of Cashel. You can't
Yeah.
see Cormac's Chapel here. But it's not until we get Romanesque style that comes into Ireland that churches suddenly start to get bigger. Because at the time, and people need to know this, churches were tiny. You couldn't fit a whole community in there when you're having various meetings
But
and assemblies. Go on there
sorry to
on.
interrupt, but at the same time, you had much, much more of them.
Mm.
So,
Yes,
Chris,
it's true.
so Christianity in most of what was the Roman Empire,
Mm.
it was based around an urban society or a society that had a large urban element. So
Yeah.
it was easy to create a parish and therefore
Mm.
parish churches, etc. Ireland, no. You
Yeah.
have in the century, maybe 2 centuries after Ireland becomes Christian, you have an
Mm.
explosion of monastic sites. Most
Yeah.
of these monastic sites might have had 6 people, maybe 10
Mm.
people. A big one might have had 20. They were
Mm.
small sites. Many of them were people fleeing the world. They
Yeah.
were not like for example, Saint Kevin. Glendalough
Yeah.
becomes a massive site. They call it a monastic city.
Mm.
But
Mm.
if you
Mm.
look at the stories about Saint Kevin, he
Yeah.
goes into the wilderness.
Mm.
And there's one story that like he's meditating. No, I don't think they use the word meditating. I think he's
Mm.
standing in the lake meditating, and he's so still, etc., that
Yeah.
a bird lands on him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. That's.
you have to take
Yeah.
these stories with a huge grain of salt.
Mm.
But you go to Skellig Michael, Skellig Michael.
Mm.
That is not a political center. It
Mm.
can't be because it's bloody difficult. Even nowadays, it's difficult to get to. It's a
Yeah.
rock in the middle of the ocean,
Mm.
and you have to climb up like 1,000 steps to get there.
Yeah.
Um,
But they wouldn't have had mass the way that we do now because of this. Like those churches were very small in the early medieval period. Like you
but
couldn't fit an
there
entire
were
community
loads
to
of
it.
them. There
One.
were loads
Sorry.
of there were
Mm.
loads of these little churches where I live because it's never fully been developed. There are
Yeah.
monastic settlements everywhere. Um,
Mm.
but most of these were kind of turned inward.
Yeah.
They may have had mass a couple of times a year, but that would have
Mm.
been an outdoor thing, or
Yes.
in a wooden church. Because the first
Yeah.
churches, when they do excavations, um,
Mm.
there's a site Cahilan or something. It's in South Kerry near Kells, and
Yeah.
it's one of the oldest church sites in Kerry. And it
Mm.
started off as wooden because they found the post holes.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think if you go to any church site in Ireland, you'll discover that it started off as a wooden church, and
Mm.
then 100 years later it becomes something stone. But most of
Mm.
them are tiny, and then towards the 10th, 11th century,
Yeah.
if not before, the majority are abandoned, and
Mm.
then you have the growth of dioceses and then parishes. It's,
Mm.
it's
Mm.
related to Malachi and the reforms that were going on in the church.
Yeah. Because I assume they would have worked exactly the way that shrines would have worked, because this is a thing now. Now, the difference between a temple and a church is that they're buildings that you go inside of. A shrine, on the other hand, is a place. They're kind of like outside temples. Oh, sorry, outside kind of
Outside churches,
places of
outside
prayer.
because
What's that?
like most early Irish churches,
Mm,
or monastic sites, you'll have, say, huts where they lived. You have a
yeah.
bigger hut, which was an oratory. If it was big enough, you could call it a church.
Mm,
Um, but then you also have a lact. Lact means stone, but a lact may have been the burial site of the founder, or
yeah.
they held the bones of some saint. And if you
Mm,
look, many of them have white quartz.
mm,
So they became places of pilgrimage.
yeah.
So you go there, like the until the beginning of the 20th century, holy wells were places of pilgrimage.
Mm,
So you go there and you do what were called the rounds. You walk, I think, in a clockwise direction, saying the rosary.
mm,
In the early medieval, I'm not sure if the rosary existed then,
yeah.
but you would go to these places.
Rosary's the 12th century. That's when it pops up with the Knights Templars. Because I know that because the Buddhists actually, Buddhism actually mimics the Knights Templars. So Buddhism doesn't have their chants until around the 13th
Okay,
century, which is very interesting.
okay.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
then they were saying some other prayer, but it was
Mm,
the same thing, walking around in a circle, praying, and
mm,
a
yeah.
lact. The picture behind me
Mm,
is, okay. My it's very slow. That's Lact Fiannon. It
mm,
is sort of it is there's an Ogham stone there, and until
mm,
the late 19th century, it was a place of pilgrimage. And again, there's a lot
mm,
of white quartz around there. It's up the mountains
yeah.
in Kerry. People went up there on certain days and prayed. Probably
Mm,
there would have been a mass celebrated, but there
yeah.
may have been so many people that if you remember, to throw in the life of
Mm,
Brian, isn't there a scene
yeah.
in the life of Brian where Jesus is doing the Beatitudes,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
there's two
Yeah. Yeah.
guys in the back and they're getting it all wrong.
Mm.
Um, sort of-
Yeah. No, meditation and meditational chants were around since 300 BC because that's in the Buddhist literature that we have meditation and meditation chants. And then it's so strange when you're looking at literature to do with Jesus Christ. He also does meditation and chants as well because remember he goes off to the desert. I remember the comment section was saying as well that he goes off to the desert for what was it, 30 days or 40 days and
40,
40 nights out in the
40,
desert.
40.
40. Yeah, so he goes out to the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, which is so funny because it fits in with Buddhist literature as well. And the reason why there's so much influences between Christianity and Buddhism is because they're on the same trade routes. So you see them overlapping a few times because the same thing happens back over to Buddhism with the chants to do with the Knights Templars. For example, the Rosary. You have a massive influence from the Rosary of the Knights Templars. That the way that prayer goes then goes back and influences Buddhism as well. They end up getting their own version of that chant as well because it's so kind of the way they're chanting together in one rhythm is so kind of catchy that the Buddhists end up making their own interpretation of it that goes back into India and goes back down that route as well as far as
Okay.
Japan. So there's always that kind of overlap there. So yeah, there would have been a much more earlier form of it by the time you get up to around the 6th, 7th century when they're doing their
Yeah,
rounds and pilgrimages and stuff.
yeah. There's a
Oh,
question at 2110 from Kevin Donovan. Uh,
Mm.
can you talk, or you've already thrown up something about St. Bridget?
yeah,
Just
I've seen that Donovan's one, and I saw this one. And I thought they kind of relate quite
yeah.
well. So,
Can you talk
St.
about
Bridget on the topic.
St. Bridget and how she transitioned from a pagan to a Catholic icon?
Mm.
I can talk, but she didn't.
Mm.
It's the opposite. She's Catholic Christian, and only at the end of the 19th century, and especially 1980s, 1990s, she becomes a pagan. There's no
Yeah.
evidence. There's no evidence
Mm.
for
Yeah.
a Bridget goddess in Ireland before
Yeah.
Christianity.
Mm.
Like people talk about the fire, but the fire that only appears in Giraldus Cambrensis.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
there is Bridget or names somewhat similar mentioned in Cormac's glossary, I think it is.
Yeah.
But that's much. That's like 12th century.
Yeah.
Saint Bridget dates to the 5th or 6th centuries,
Yeah.
and there is evidence for historical Bridget.
Mm.
The 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 idea of a pagan Bridget is a very modern invention.
Yeah. It's people's imagination going wild, I find, with the connection to York. And there is a goddess called the goddess Burgundies. And York and Dublin kind of always had the same kind of trade routes. So there is a possibility that Kildare, before the 6th century, may have had some kind of similar goddess from York, going from York then over from the Isle of Man and then over to the Kildare area. But there's no evidence of that,
Yeah,
is there, Owen?
the problem is we know nothing, almost
Mm.
nothing about pre-Christian Ireland.
Yeah.
Sorry, we know almost nothing about Iron Age Ireland.
Mm.
Like, if you go back to Neolithic,
Yeah.
we have the passage tombs,
Mm.
and you can, from all of these massive, amazing passage tombs,
Mm.
we can work out a lot about that society. They
Yeah.
disappear from our DNA.
Mm.
There's no writing. We do not know what they call themselves. We do not know what they call their gods, but we kind of know what's important to them.
Mm.
In the Bronze Age, you have lots of stone circles, stone rows, many of which are aligned. Like there's one near me that's aligned with the lunar stanza, which is a 37-year cycle.
Mm.
So again, we can figure out a lot about what they want. For the Iron Age is the dark ages of Irish history.
Mm.
We know almost nothing. What,
Yeah.
like, there are things we can. Crumb seems to have been important. There
Mm.
are mountains seem to have been important, like the Paps Danu, probably Croagh Patrick, and various other holy mountains. There's a lot of cairns on top of mountains. Um,
Mm.
the problem is we have a interesting literature. If
Yeah.
you dig through this literature, you can find good stuff.
Mm.
Except the Victorians and 20th century people, they messed everything up. So using translations of translations of translations, they created a fantasy uh, pagan, Irish paganism,
Mm.
which has really messed things up. Like
Yes.
Maeve, if you look at the history of Tara, there's a great book came out on Tara, and
Mm.
they dig through the sources. Maeve was connected to Tara. The
Yeah.
royal sites, the royals, our best connection to Iron Age paganism is the royal sites.
Mm.
Tara, Rathcrogan, Cashel. The Cashel, because of its history, is harder. Um, and you can dig through that stuff and get some old legends and have an idea about
Mm.
what they did. But the literature is all Christian literature. It's written through a Christian lens. They use an idea of Druid, which is taken from Caesar,
Mm.
a Roman idea. So we have very little idea. It drives me mad at times. I get very frustrated. Um,
Mm.
People, they have this fantasy. It's a Disney version of Irish history.
Yeah.
Now all the pagans are going to hate on me.
Well,
Talking about pagan question there, I'll just quickly get this one for Christopher. What was the name of the pagan Christmas tree? You're talking about the Yule log. I know that because we had to cover it this year for the, what was it called? Rachel's channel. When we covered the influences going from Norway over to Dublin during the early medieval period, where they would have had the Yule log in the Great Hall, which eventually became Dublin Castle. So that is what the name of it was, is the Yule log. Not the Christmas tree, though. If anybody thinks, oh, well, the Yule log eventually becomes the Christmas tree, it actually doesn't. Not from an Irish perspective. We don't get Christmas trees. We have Yule logs that are brought in during the 9th and 10th century. And then we don't actually get the Christmas tree until the 19th century. It's actually the Victorians bring it in from German. The Germans are doing it and then they end up getting a German monarchy.
The Germans, I think, only started in the 16th century or something.
Yeah.
The Christmas tree is definitely Christian.
Yeah. And that's the 19th century. So we don't get the Christmas tree in Ireland until the 19th century. It's the Victorians that bring it into Ireland. So that's a constant thing where people get mixed up between the Yule log and the Christmas tree. They think it's an evolution, but it's actually not. So we get the Yule log around the 9th and 10th century in Dublin. And then we get the Christmas tree itself in the 19th century, from my understanding.
Talking just because we're talking about symbols, and Kevin had sort of said about here, do the Irish have gang signs like the Red Hand? It's funny, I've talked about it before, but the O'Neills only adopted it in 1350. But there's a really interesting thing in 1690, very contentious year in Irish history. Yeah. There's actually a debate between sort of three poets. Dermot Lynch, Owen O'Donnelly, and Scottish poet Niall McMurray. And Dermot sort of Lynch goes that it belongs to me, the McGuinnesses. Owen's date says it belongs to the O'Neills, and Niall says it actually belongs to the MacDonalds of Scotland, due to them being the descendants of the three Collas. Now, all of those have problems, but it's an interesting thing. But I just wanted to throw that in. But I did want to actually pull up this one. This one might be in a good wee. Who would be this one from Mali?
Who would be the contender for the Irish patron saint that was born in Ireland?
There are two. There are two. Like if you read stuff, I've read that Ireland has three patron saints. Saint Patrick is one, Saint Bridget is the other, and Columkill is the third.
So Saint Columbus or Columba didn't go in there.
No, they never made the first rank, and then
but Columbkill's also known as Columbus, so
I tripped over myself as I was saying. I was like,
I thought you were on about different Columba. Sorry, I just tried a bit spotlight on it. You couldn't like shy away. I was like, no. I mean, Bridget as well. Bridget, could also. But I sort of agree. St. Columkill's probably would be my argument, but you've got St. Emily, St. Alvie of Emily, St. Eater of Kilidi. They're native, but I don't think they would really push the.
You see, you have loads of regional ones like St. Finan or Finian is everywhere in South Kerry. St. Kevin, in Wicklow. Was Kieran from Clonmacnoise?
Yeah, he is. It's Kieran is because you're.
And I know in Cork, the Protestant cathedral in Cork is Saint Finbar.
Yeah,
and I know nothing about Saint Finbar.
Saint Finbar, huh?
So, and like you go everywhere, and there's a saint. There are many local saints. Yeah. Like in Northumberland, was it Saint Oswald? There was a very important Saxon saint who would have at one stage would have been a very strong candidate to be patron saint of England. They had his bones somewhere, and then I think they got robbed or something. They were brought out for battles.
Yeah, I believe, like say, Saint Ida or Ita of Kilidi was in early 9th century, sort of around that time, a little bit after, was a contender when they were sort of mulling it over. I think we've kind of got it spot on with them. Bridget of Kildare and Columkill. Yeah. I don't think you're really gonna. I think they've kind of got a spot on with those sort of the triple threat. St. Patrick I don't know, Armagh did a lot of work to get him in the position where he's in. So,
Well, Dennis, in fairness, Saint Finbar is actually a funny one. I'd love to go full steam ahead with Saint Finbar, but the problem is our main academic down in University College of Cork, what was it called? Dr. Damien Bracken, who's probably Professor Dr. Damien Bracken at this point now. Tripping over myself. I mean, Professor Damien Bracken at this point, I'd have to look it up because I'm over in Okinawa right now. But he has actually argued that Saint Finbar's may have not existed, that it probably was just a cult, because Saint Finbar's, when he appears, his cult pops up left, right, and center. So there may have been an original source for Saint Finbar's, but his existence in Cork may or may not have happened, that it probably was just a cult of Saint Finbar that existed in Cork at the time. And that's why we know so little about Saint Finbar's. I think he was just given, wasn't he? Just given a land in Cork to study.
I know nothing about him, but it sounds like Damon is, if he's a professor in UCC and saying that Saint Finbar did not exist, is living dangerously.
I take it, but I'll take his word for it.
Like Saint Brendan is another one.
Yeah, and debated if he was real or not. Was it?
Well, I think Saint Brendan, there is a strong, there is strong history for his existence.
Oh right, yeah.
There's Tom at 2147. He makes a very cool comment. I'm going to bury myself in a passage grave on my hill up back, getting a permit to make a family cemetery on my farm. I just to annoy my family. And although I know it's not historical, I've told them I want to be put in a little Viking ship and one of them has to fire a burning arrow.
My mother wants the same one.
Oh, Jesus Christ. You'll annoy all the Viking historians, though, because they actually argue that never happened. Because if you look at Viking burials...
I just want to annoy the people I live behind.
You'll have to comment. The comment section will go on fire now in a second, quite literally.
I want to make them work. Because they'll all miss.
Do you know what? I'm all up for Tom's suggestion because, and it's very in keeping with Irish history, because we've always recycled religious places, burial places, ceremonial places as new waves of people have come in. And so, I think that's a great idea. People who may argue that it's some sort of sacrilege or disrespect, but we have a long tradition of recycling these sort of places. So why not? If you can get the permission for it, go for it.
Well, I mean, in England, there's something like that exists. This company, they've built sort of an underground kind of version of a barrow, and your bones, or I'm not sure if they cremate you first. You go in there, and they've done so well that they're building a second.
Fascinating. Saint Ciaran. Who is this guy? Owen, can you expand on who is Saint Ciaran? If you don't mind.
Hold on, Saint Ciaran. 1 second, I'm getting a blank. Where was he from? Because there's so many saints.
He was the one that was up in I'm sure he's the one up in what was it called? Clonmacnoise, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's it. The founder of Clonmacnoise, and I think he was the teacher of heaven.
Yeah, but he was not meant to be supposedly pre St. Patrick, as well as a claim by Clonmacnoise that he's pre St. Patrick as well.
No, shouldn't he be around the what was it called? The 7th century? No,
I'm sure there is a saint of. And it could be tradition, but I'm sure.
I thought it was Saint Declan in Waterford who.
Yes.
Pre-Patrick.
Thank you. Yes, I've conflated the two. Thank you very much. This is the problem. We have too many bloody saints.
Saint Ciaran is one of the 12 apostles of Ireland. And he's definitely post Patrick.
Hang on, but who Saint Corcoran? Who is this guy? He has a holy well which Corcoran is the Irish saint. I mean, there's a Saint Corcan, or sometimes Saint Cronin.
Well, this is the one up in what was it, Clare? There's this, yeah.
I can't remember where he is. Where's
Well, he's up in what was it, Clare, up around that region.
Well, I know he had a site up in the only reason I know of this St. Cronin is because there's a monastic site literally just down the road from me, Nendrum, on Mahi Island. It's beautiful, we say. I would highly recommend it if you're ever in on around the Arts Peninsula. That's dedicated to him, but I don't know if he's associated with the site. Like, this is the thing as well. Saints, their support moved. Different people would adopt the saints from different regions, but also saints are often known for building churches, but they often built more than one. So and sometimes in multiple locations. Whether that's true or not, as in, like, we never know if they truly built those sites, because there's a lot of oral tradition based around them. But you can just see how a saint's following, how their place of worships, they can be scattered around the island, and also families. It became another reason that Owen had sort of touched on this. It actually became a bit prestigious to have a saint associated with your clan or king group. So you would sort of jazz up the dealings of your family who had dealings with the church. Maybe he was a priest. Suddenly, next thing you know, he's a martyr. And related king groups in the area would sort of massage the history a bit to make it linked to them too. So St. Kieran could be linked to Clonmacnoise, but I guarantee he has other sites scattered around the island.
And there's two. I've just checked. There's two St. Kierans. That's another problem. There's St. Kieran the elder and the younger. Clonmacnoise is the younger, but like the patron saint of South Kerry is St. Fionn, and like Skellig Michael is associated with him. The church island in behind Warville associated with him. There are, I don't know how many St. Finian's Wells and other small churches associated with him, but there's at least two other St. Finians in Ireland from more or less the same time. It gets very, very confusing. And one interesting we haven't touched on, what is a saint? No one's asked that. What is a saint? Because nowadays when people think of saints, they think of people who are canonized. There's very, very strict rules nowadays to make someone a saint. But in the past, saints are saints by acclamation. Like the apostles, Peter, Paul, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, none of those are canonized. St. Patrick is not canonized. Columkill is not canonized. Bridget is not canonized. But they are popular saints. So I think basically someone founds a monastery, they die, they're buried, their burial place becomes a site of pilgrimage, they become a saint. And like the names survive, we know nothing about them. Others are pure inventions, like in Valencia where I live, the patron is called Darerca. She is supposedly the sister of St. Patrick.
Yeah.
There's also a Darerca up in Louth. But St. Patrick didn't have a sister. At least he didn't have a sister who was in Ireland at the same time he became a saint. But somehow or other, the folk tales have created a St. Darerca. And I think there's even a church. My brother lives in Kilcock in Kildare, and there it's St. Coca or something like that, sort of, which for Brazilians and Latin and like sort of Latin language speakers, it kind of means St. Cocaine, as in a slang.
Yeah.
Although that kind of ties into this, and I can reel off a sort of few, but obviously St. Columkill and Bridget were both associated with royal dynasties in their areas. St. Columkill from Garton, he's part of the part of the wider Neil.
Ken O'Connell, wasn't he? He was Ken O'Connell.
Yeah, Ken O'Connell. That was the word. I couldn't remember. I had E. Connell in my brain. I couldn't get the Kennel to come forward. Yeah, and I can't remember Bridget's Kildare lineage, but both are, like I say, associated with royal king groups. I think there was a Moel Finnear of Brega. He is another one that's sort of he's part of the Siliad Slian. He's another one that's sort of associated with and then Saint Enda of Aaron is I think chose to abdicate his throne and decided to go on a pilgrimage to Rome. So and then there's
Saint Kevin is another one. I can't remember but he comes from a sort of, he was definitely a noble as far as I know.
Yeah, I mean, but also some were localized cults as well. So like so Turlock y Breen kind of had a wee bit of a had this sort of cult following. You know, in parts of Munster, there's records that he sort of sainted. There's Finketa of I can never remember. He's a king of Connacht anyway. He has a cult following when he dies in the 9th century, middle of the 9th century. He sort of has a cult following. So you know, there's sort of these and that they're sort of like sanctified locally, as it were.
Like Saint Mora of Fahan, who seems to have existed because I think the National Museum in Dublin has his staff, and I think the London Museum has his bell. He's the patron saint of the O'Neills, or he did become at some stage. He's where the Kenalowan originates from in Inishowen.
Saint Bridget. Saint Bridget. She's an interesting. All right. What was it called? The comment section just highlighting that Bridget's father was supposedly a chieftain. She was supposedly, wasn't it? Her father was the Ree over in Leinster, which directly translates to king. But he had an overking over him as well. I do wonder if at the time
there's different stories about her.
She's a Druid priest as well, isn't she? Like the daughter of a Druid priest, and you know,
and her mother may have been a slave or a concubine or something like that. So sort of. That's the problem with many of these. The story, like if you look at the stories of Saint Patrick, like there's getting rid of not the fish, the other yolks, the snakes, and the toads, but everyone forgets about the toads. That's all inventions hundreds of years later.
But at the same time, it would make sense for her father to be a member of the nobility in Ireland to get the position that she did in the 6th century, to be the head abbess of Kildare at the time, in my opinion.
Possibly, because it was something new.
Yeah.
If you like, she's in the first wave of Christianity, and the Ireland becoming Christian wasn't like a switch. You know, Henry VIII in 1530 something says England is now Protestant. It took them. England is only, especially north of England, is only fully or 90% Protestant 70 years later or something, and that's with a big repression. So she's in the first Christian wave in Ireland. Most nobles and most noble women are probably not concerned with joining this new religion and becoming an abbess. Jump ahead 200 years, and probably it's like someone from a noble family that's a good position for them to have, but not at that time.
Here's a good one from the lovely Dwayne Fitzsimmons. So Dickie Patrick's first convert, surely he has a feast day on 29th of April. Surely he is a saint.
That's a funny one. As Owen was highlighting there, just because somebody is a saint in Ireland doesn't mean that they're canonized as a saint in Rome. So it does, as Owen was expanding on there, like what's the difference between an Irish saint that they recognize in Ireland and a saint
But
that's recognized in Rome?
they are recognized saints. They're not canonized.
Mm,
I think
yeah.
canonized Irish saints, you have Saint Lawrence O'Toole, Saint Oliver Plunkett, and I
Mm,
think there's a more recent one. I think in the last
mm,
decade there's been a third one. So, like the number of
yeah.
official canonized saints you can count on one hand. But
Mm,
the Catholic Church recognizes Saint Bridget, Columkill,
mm,
Kieran, Declan. It recognizes them. The canonization is something from the late Middle Ages.
Yeah,
yeah.
and no, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, and it just like I said, it again ties into local local family politics as well, because obviously after that, you know, the Edicon, who are the descendants of Dicu Mac Trickham, are they use that sort of influence then for like the 7th and 8th
Thank you so
century
much.
to sort of expand
Mm.
their influence. You know, they're acquiring like nearby churches and stuff like that. So they're certainly in a localized area, but you think from that area.
Actually, I was a bit cheeky there. Mihal, I was actually a bit cheeky there. He actually is recognized by Rome. He kind of sneaks into the Rome. Rome go off and recognize a whole load of saints in
There you
Ireland,
go.
which is weird because I don't think Saint Bridget is recognized in
She is.
Rome.
She
But
is.
Dicky actually is.
She
Oh,
is.
she is. Is she recognized in Rome? Right.
Yeah.
I thought it was. What was it? Maynooth University highlighted that Bridget of Sweden is recognized by Rome, but what was it called? Rome didn't recognize Saint Bridget as a saint yet, from my
No,
understanding.
she's not a canonized saint, but she's a saint. She's
Yeah.
as much of a
Oh, okay,
saint
yeah,
as Saint Paul, Saint Peter, Saint Andrew. I think Saint
Mm.
George.
But I
I
think
think Saint George got pushed out. They decided he didn't exist.
Jesus Christ, what happened there?
And Saint David, like, you know,
Mm. But I think Dicky is recognized by a saint as a canonized saint by Rome, and his feast day is on April
no,
29th in the Roman Catholic Church.
not canonized. Not he's a saint,
Mm.
but
So
not canonized.
which Dwayne actually specifies the date. He already specified it, so there you go.
29th of April. Yeah, that's what the internet says as well, because I was a bit cheeky there while you were all talking.
No,
I was
did
there
too.
looking
I
to
did
see if it
too.
was recognized by
No,
Rome.
I mean,
Dennis points out here, Blessed Dominic Collins was involved in the Kinsale 1601 period, and he was actually he was captured in the siege of Bearhaven, Castletown Bear, tortured, and then eventually executed. And he's become blessed. And I have a feeling, just in relation to that, there are a number of priests executed in Ireland in the early Stuart period and some in the Elizabethan who have become blessed, and maybe one of them has become a saint.
I just want to carry, because I was actually going to. I've just finished my point quickly about the Edicon, because for Philip jumped in with the fact that he is a saint. It is funny that, like I said, in the 7th and 8th century, their power kind of grew, and they became hereditary ecclesiastical members of Saul and all the way down to Downpatrick. But they actually came into when Armagh starts to adopt St. Patrick as their sort of, you know, their patron saint, and they actually come into conflict with each other as the Edicon are obviously pushing for this. You know, they're effectively, you know, they can replicate the story of Peter and Jesus, as the successors of St. Patrick being the first convert and all, that they're eventually they're kind of quashed by Armagh. They obviously have bigger supporters of Armagh, but yeah, it's an interesting period on our history, especially with saints and politics.
Someone mentions about slaves building monastic sites for the saint. I've lost contact there. I think yes, there were slaves, but most of the monastic sites are so small. They were probably built by the monks who lived there. Because if you look, the ones that have been excavated, they know it starts here. There were 2 huts and a wooden church, and eventually 100 years later, they become stone. But there were 6 or 7 people. There were no slaves. I think most of these guys and women, because some had women, they built the stuff themselves. So I think you have to be careful with the idea of slaves in Gaelic Ireland. Yes, there were some. There definitely were some in Saxon Ireland, but I think most labor would not have been done by slaves, and especially the building of early monastic sites. When you're talking about, for example, building Cashel, I have a feeling most of that would have been built by, on the one hand, skilled masons.
Yes.
There's a huge amount of skilled work. There might have been some forced labor. I know that guy, Blind Boy, who does that podcast, which I'm not over fond of. He had this show on RTE, and I just saw the ad for it, and he just kept talking about slaves. I think that
he's one of the rubber bandits, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's one of the rubber bandits.
I don't understand. I don't think he's a good historian.
He kind of butchered what a lot of the academics were trying to say, and he kind of ran away with the whole slavery thing. The problem with himself is that he has a very modern interpretation, and he's not even a fan of medieval history. Like on none of his social media pages, he very much supports modern interpretation of Irish history. But he doesn't seem to be like, I've gone through his list of what he supports and doesn't support. And for somebody who went off and made a documentary on Irish medieval history, he doesn't support any of the medieval historians, which is very funny, given that he had a lot of them on his, on his little documentary and stuff. But he seemed to have gotten what he wanted, and then seemed to have ran from a very modern interpretation, because these days, obviously, we have to have, and I know I'm going to get into trouble with this for everybody, but the kind of white guilt, because it's popular, going, oh, well, I'm a white person, I must feel guilty for my roots. And I know both the right side and left side are going to have their interpretation of that. But the problem is that you've got rich, wealthy people who want to jump on top of that with their whip and go, right, come on, let's get that whip out because it's the popular thing to do, instead of sitting down and actually understanding colonization, which is very frustrating for Asian people because of the fact that instead of having a deep conversation about colonization in places like Bangladesh and Indonesia, which did suffer from famines, you just have people going on about, oh, but we need to suffer because of various other things are kind of, modern pop history, instead of sitting down and understanding what is colonization. That's my little rant on it. But my point being is that they're kind of taking it more from a modern interpretation rather than sitting down and actually understanding the literature itself. I fully understand.
There's a problem with Irish nationalism. Has this idea of Irish were slaves? They weren't. There was indentured labor. After a few years, you would become free, and many of these people then become slave owners. There's a huge misuse of sources. There's a historian in Limerick, Hogan, I think his name is. He does brilliant work on dismantling this. But people cling to the idea of Irish slaves, and it's been taken up by people with very dodgy politics, especially from America,
It all is, yeah.
racists, etc., sort of to say, "Oh,
Oh
look,
yeah.
the Irish were sent as slaves
But
to
it's
and
so,
they
yeah.
don't complain." And then, like, I saw this video by this guy
Mm,
claiming to be a history professor, and he
mm,
starts off basically saying that like 20,000 Irish were taken as prisoners in the Battle of
mm,
Kinsale, and then
yeah.
sold as slaves to the Spanish, and
Mm,
like he gets 200,000 views. It's
yeah.
complete and utter rubbish.
Oh
Um,
yeah. The
it's
problem I have it, and I hope the comment section doesn't turn into it as well, is it turns into I had it worse than you,
yeah,
because of the fact what was it? The conversation on my I don't know if you were paying attention to my shorts this week, but the main bulk of it actually myself and Rachel did a short together, and hopefully I can do more collaboration shorts with you guys as well because you can do it now on YouTube and Instagram. I don't know about TikTok. It'd be great if you can do it on TikTok as well. But myself and Rachel had a collaboration talking about the fact that academics do not recognize the word potato famine. It's recognized as either the Great Famine or the Great Hunger. That's how we have to refer to when talking about it from an academic standard. And very quickly it turned into, oh, but my people had it worse than your people. And it's like, geez, it's not actually about who had it, about, the worst. It's about trying to understand what happened and why it happened and why we shouldn't repeat this history again. And it always bloody annoys me when it turns into an argument of my people had it worse than your people. It's like having an
yeah,
argument about who has the bigger sausage, which is also bloody frustrating as well. My military had a bigger sausage than your military, so my military is better than yours. God's sake. How old are you people,
yeah. Like one thing that gets me, I've seen many videos saying the Irish were the first slaves in the Americas.
Mm,
No, they weren't. The first slaves in the Americas were Indians who were enslaved
oh, no.
in the early 16th century, 1500,
Mm,
1501, by Spanish and Portuguese. And
mm,
within a few decades, they began importing slaves from Africa, much before the English
mm,
ever did anything. The Americas goes from Canada to Newfoundland, not to Newfoundland, to
mm.
Tierra del Fuego. Um, like America, when you say Americas, you include South and Central America.
Oh, so you broke up there.
Sort of the Americas includes,
Mm,
two continents. So the first slaves were slaves of the Spanish and the Portuguese.
thank you so much. Mm.
I think, dear.
Oh,
I think.
100%. And
I
I
think
agree with
Daniel
go
Sloss.
on there.
I just. I think
Mm,
Daniel Sloss kind of makes a joke that's kind of poignant on this.
mm,
When he's referring to his pregnant wife, and he's saying how men suffer trauma too during this process, which obviously gets the crowd and the women very uppity about it. But he says, but it's like the man loses an arm during the pregnancy, but the women loses both
mm,
arms and both legs. You shouldn't,
mm,
at no point is he going to turn around to say to his wife, I lost an arm during this whole process, because she lost two arms and two legs. No one should
mm.
take away from the fact that there was suffering for the Irish people, but to try and pit that against the suffering of a
Yeah.
community that lost two arms and two legs because we lost an arm is
Mm.
ridiculous. To say that we know what you're going through, we have the same trauma passed on through generations. It's a ridiculous sentiment to have, and it's an unfair comparison.
Well, you see, this is why there should be more study when it comes down to colonization. And I didn't realize how much more study Ireland does actually need to do into colonization until I had very deep conversations with people from Bangladesh and Indonesia and the way they suffered from British colonization, that I suddenly took a step back and went, Jesus Christ, we need to do even more study in our schools to do with colonization, because the way they're impacted from the Great Hunger also impacts Indonesia and Bangladesh as well, because Britain, actually, the British government, I'm not talking about English people, I don't want to single out English people there. I know they had a kind of weird relationship with their own government as well, but the British government brought the frame of the Great Hunger and started to use it in places like Bangladesh and Indonesia as well. So when I had deep conversations from people from Bangladesh and Indonesia, I was like, Jesus Christ, we need to do further study into this. So when other Irish people and Indonesian people come together and have a conversation on this, we can delve into it and have a proper conversation about what exactly had happened to our people and how it affects us today. Because Jesus Christ, those events only happened, what was it called, 100 years ago. And even Indonesia, up to the 1970s under America, suffered from the same echo again. So it's definitely something we need to go into further research and study into, and even teach into primary schools, because colonization still affects us today, you know? So yeah, I 100% agree with you.
So I'm having difficulty reading the chat because I don't have a mouse with me today. There are people talking about, I don't know if they're saying that I don't understand what indentured labor is. I do. And their indentured labor was horrible. You were treated very bad. But the Irish indentured labor, first of all, the numbers are massively exaggerated. Secondly, indentured labor was for a certain period. You couldn't just kill your indentured labor person. And normally after 7 years or something, the indentured labor person is free. Many of them returned to Ireland. Chattel slavery, black African slavery, is for life. Your children will become slaves. You are property. You can be sold. Your family can be split up. There's a huge, huge difference, and you can be killed.
And the numbers and the sheer numbers that were, you know, again, no, there are people who I think people just don't understand the sheer numbers and volumes that went through, and the how long the system lasted, as well, compared to how long the indentured servitude system lasted, like you say, I want to just keep referring back to, like, nobody's taking away from Irish suffering or the suffering of our ancestors.
Michal, this is the problem I have now, because the conversation now has turned into, oh, I had it worse than you. They're both shite. And okay, like, if you're going to go into a who has the bigger sausage argument, what was it called? Obviously, if you look at the paperwork, slavery is worse than having indentured slavery. What was it called? Doing the indentured, however the lady pronounce it.
Especially in the Caribbean and the tropical areas, the soldiers sent there by the Spanish, by the Portuguese, by the English, the soldiers and the first settlers, they died in their thousands. Like, sort of, Europeans going to tropical areas die. Like in the 20th century in Brazil, they began to build the Trans-Amazonian Amazonian highway, and it was known as the Death Highway because the people were just dying in their dozens. I think it was in the 1960s under the military regime. It just the forest has so many insects carrying diseases, etc., that the people died. Cleveland is asking something about. I don't think you understand how 3,500 men are the ancestors of the Appalachians, but what percentage of the 20K are? Who are those 20,000? I'm not understanding that. I'm not managing to scroll up and down the comments. What 20,000? And most Appalachians, Scots Irish, so many would have been descendants of people from the people who came into Ulster on the plantation of Ulster and then moved on. I don't think the Appalachians are descendants of indentured servants, because what is now the United States is settled much later. Most Irish indentured would have been sent to Jamaica, Montserrat, places like that. A few would have gone to Virginia, but not many.
And as people have mentioned there about reparations, is I in my opinion, no one's personally guilty of the actions of their ancestors, but people are responsible for how they respond to that history. So you have to acknowledge it honestly. You can't ignore it. You can't defend it. So defending, glorifying, or refusing to sort of acknowledge past wrongs is a choice made today. So you can't just suddenly, you don't get to celebrate things that come from these horrific crimes and then claim that, oh, I don't, I'm not, I shouldn't pay for the crimes of my ancestors. Well, stop honoring the crimes, whether inadvertently or directly. Then these things have consequences of and modern day consequences. And I think you don't get to claim that you are a victim of oppression in Ireland through indentured. I'm a descendant of indentured servitude, and then on the same hand, completely slap down the experience of Native, Indigenous American, African Americans, and other groups as a just swat away because you're on a similar parallel. It's not right, personally, in my personal opinion. Probably going to get a lot of hate, but still.
Well, people are going to hate you no matter what you say at this point, especially when it comes down to who suffered the worst or who has the biggest sausage, because even people who disagree with us in the comment section, it's just turning into, well, I suffered more than you, and it's like, oh, Jesus Christ, I don't care. I'm only here to talk about history. I'm not talking about who has the biggest sausage. It's the same thing when people start to talk about military history. It turns into a case of, well, my military force was bigger than your military force, so we had a bigger sausage. I don't care. Like, honest to God, I couldn't care less. I'm only here to talk about the facts of the history itself. Anyway, getting back to Easter.
Hang on, I just want to, because this has come up with a couple of people. No, Appalachia, Owen's already covered it, and he's mostly right. It's Scotch-Irish. Most Americans conflate Scotch-Irish with Irishness because it's got Irish in the term, possibly. I don't know if that's, but actually most of them are of, like Owen, I'm just going to reiterate it. A lot of the plantation was made up of Northern English and Lowland Scots who moved into Ulster. Within about 3 generations, they start settling the Americas, especially around the Appalachian area. Now, these people didn't really marry outside of Ulster Scots plantation owners, planters or undertakers or anything like that. They married locally. Very few married into native Irish families. So the amount of Irish descent any Appalachian person would have would probably have come later through things that have migrations that have happened through that area. But the actual initial planting of the Appalachians was by Scotch-Irish who had very little to non-Irish descent. Just
yeah. Happy days. Actually, jumping back over to Easter, and this is something I want to bring up as well. So, and then get Micheál and Owen O'Neill's interpretation of this. Whipping of the herring. Have you heard of the whipping of the herring before on Easter? No? Or yes?
Sorry, say that again. I was getting
it's called whipping of the herring, right? And I don't know if this happened. I know this happened in the 19th century, but I don't know if this happened during the medieval period. Whipping of the herring, as in the bunny, the whipping of the herring. Have you heard that before?
The bunny.
We used to whip the Easter bunny. What?
Yeah, did this right. So, as I was saying before, right. So, what happens is that during the medieval period, what's this?
That's something strange you did in Mallow.
Probably, but no. Supposedly, this was done in Cork, and it was done in what was it called? But regardless, because you're meant to spend the 40 days staying away from all forms of meat in Ireland, what you end up having is a big build-up of meat going into the Easter feast, right? And so what the butcher would do is that they would have a parade in the, especially in the city areas, but it probably happened in the monastic settlements as well. I don't know. This is only recorded in the 19th century, but I'm just interested, and I do wonder if this happened during the medieval period as well. But I have no sources to prove it. But I do wonder what you guys think. Is that they would get a herring and they would put it onto a spear allegedly, and then they would have a parade. And during the parade, the butcher would walk around to try to gather people up. He would put this herring onto a spear, a rabbit basically, and then he would march up and down, and basically a parade of people would start going behind him, and they would make their way over to his butcher shop or wherever he was butchering the meat, and they would slowly follow him. And as they were following him, they would get whips and palms or whatever they had, because you still have the palms from Palm Sunday, and they would start whipping the rabbit or the herring or the bunny that was at the end of it, or the rabbit or whatever it is, and start whipping it and start tearing it to kingdom come. And by the time they would get to the end of the parade or the river, they would get the bunny or the herring and they would throw it into the river. Now, I said it to Rachel, and Rachel said it makes absolutely no sense to her, because why would you waste good meat during the medieval period? But I do wonder, is it a case of, because during the the Celtic paganism times and stuff, you would have sacrifices to bogs and rivers. Is it a case of, it goes back to pagan times where you would sacrifice the meat into the river? Is that what it comes from?
I'd say no. I'd say it's a much more recent thing.
Okay.
Like in Kerry, and I think in Ringsend in Dublin,
I
have on the 26th of December, you hunt the wren, the rainbow.
Yeah.
And then I know in Cork in the 19th century and early 20th century, on Shrove Tuesday, which would be the Tuesday, if you're in Brazil or Portugal or Spain or Italy, it's the Tuesday of Carnival. They had the Skellig Day, where basically people would go around grabbing unmarried men and unmarried women and tying them together and sort of marrying them. They would get up to all sorts of things, and putting them on boats sometimes as a joke, because there was an idea that if you could get married on this day in the Skelligs without sort of so there were all sorts of folk traditions, but their traditions are nothing to do with pagan Ireland. Sort of they're more recent inventions. Like it's the same as that. Like imagine 200 years from now, we're trying to, what's this? 12 days, 12 pubs of Christmas. Is that or Christmas jumper?
That's definitely a pagan. I don't know what you're talking about. Knitting hoodies now and all that stuff. That's all pagan. I don't know what you're talking about, Owen. Me and the boys have been celebrating that for thousands of years, would you believe it or not,
Yeah, sort of. So you'll find that most folk traditions are Christian to an extent. Like there's very little that goes all the way back.
Yeah, for sure.
Apart from bonfires, or I believe there's something called clapper as well, which is like in parts of Ulster they make like lots of noise during the festival with sticks and rattles and stuff like that. I wouldn't really know of any traditions. Oh, I'm in the wrong screen. And again. By the way, Kevin, I just want to say, because I don't know if you feel a little like we were arguing against you specifically, about what we were arguing against is primarily just.
Well, I'm arguing against Kevin. I don't know what we're arguing about, but I'm arguing against Kevin anyway. Kevin, I'm targeting you. I want you to know that.
It's a generalized view amongst some groups within Irish American diaspora, and maybe their linked political groups and stuff. It's not specifically aimed at you. So don't. And some of your comments were only used as starting points for wider conversation, not specifically just going, you believe this. Just I kind of got that impression from one of your comments that you thought maybe we were honing in on you, and we definitely weren't.
5-minute marriages. I think that's quite interesting. I don't know what the actual festival of that one is because you guys are bringing it up there. But I do find it interesting that in
Oh,
the
hang on.
early medieval period, people used to get married during these festivals. And then the following day, they'd be over to the priest saying, I was drunk. I was drunk when I made that contract. It doesn't count. And then having the priest give them the divorce the following day. I find that very, very interesting. It's not until we get up to the high Middle Ages that the Pope gets so annoyed about all these divorces popping up the next day that he starts demanding that marriages get more official. Because in the early medieval period, to get a contract of marriage, it didn't take very much, unless Owen wants to what was it called? Go against what I'm saying here
No, no,
under
no,
what was it
agree,
called? A
agree.
Guide to Early Irish Law by Fergus Kelly. From my understanding, all you needed was the two people who were getting married and a witness. You didn't even need a priest or a church. You didn't even need to go inside the church to get married in the early medieval period to get a contract of marriage. Just two people and a priest. And so during the early medieval period, you have a lot of people getting drunk during festivals and then getting themselves married. And then the following day going over to the priest and saying, oh, well, I was drunk at the time, so I was too intoxicated to agree soberly to that marriage and contract, from my understanding, unless Owen has a completely different interpretation.
No, I think, again, the Catholic Church
Mm,
is very good at portraying itself as like eternal and universal. Whereas
mm,
for much of history, the vast majority of people who regard themselves as Catholics have not exactly obeyed what the church has been saying. And that includes priests.
mm.
Like like you can find Hugh O'Neill is disciplining Gaelic priests in Tyrone in the 1590s because they all had concubines.
Oh,
Um, um, the, the the Irish Catholic Church, a lot of them were, doing naughty things.
mm,
Um, there would have been a shortage of priests. There weren't that many priests. There
mm,
wasn't, and this creates big problems for people who are into genealogy. There weren't registered. Like nowadays, many people, you want to find out where's my great great grandfather going back 100 times.
mm,
Um, there's very few medieval registers in Ireland. Sort
mm,
of someone and like the peasantry, etc., like that, they're married because they say they're married.
mm.
Sort of maybe a priest blesses them at some stage,
Yeah.
Um, it's
Well, you
and
see,
it's
this is a.
only it's
Go
only
on.
really with the Council of Trent
Yeah.
that the church reforms itself and
Yeah.
starts concentrating on this and says to be a Catholic you have to do this.
Mm,
Um, the Protestant Reformation to a great
mm.
extent reforms the Catholic Church. And the
Yeah.
Catholic Church said, yeah, we better concentrate on it and stuff like that. Stop with the indulgences. And then I hope there's no Pentecostals on, but like, the mad evangelical churches in the States and in South America these days, they do all
Mm,
the stuff that the Roman Church did in the 16th century that caused the Reformation.
mm,
Um, so the the pre Council of Trent Catholicism was much
mm.
more lax. So
Yeah.
people they have this idea of the church being all powerful, etc. It wasn't because
Mm.
the priest was probably married.
Yeah.
He was probably responsible for 5,000 people. He was not like an Irish Catholic priest from like the early 1900s or
Mm,
1890s, where there's loads of priests and they have the time and ability to, go around poking their nose into everyone's business
mm.
and, be really concerned about sexuality and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
Do you know who the biggest problems were? Was the merchants. The merchants were the biggest problems during the medieval period. They were actually discussing this both on Medieval Irish podcast. I can't remember. I do apologize if any doctor or professors watching this today. I can't remember your name for the life of you. But I do apologize for that. But there was a discussion over a Medieval Irish podcast and also at Gone Medieval. And they were talking about the merchants, how bad the merchants were for having multiple wives. Because a merchant would go to one port and he had one wife at one port, and then he would go off to the other port and spend some time in another port in a different realm, and he would have another wife again. And the problem comes in then when he has children to inherit that business, right? So he would set up a company, especially going into the late medieval period. And then you'd have women that suddenly appear with these children and be like, I'm his wife. And a huge argument would kick off. And so they would go straight to the clergy and argue who was the first original wife, because it was the first original wife, was the official wife to the all these contracts of the marriage itself. And that was really important because then their child would inherit the entire business that merchant set up. So this was a huge problem throughout the entirety of the medieval period. And you would think that, you've always got this idea that it was men enforcing Christianity in the European world. In fact, it was women more likely pushing for more Christianity and more rights in Christianity, because women were fighting for their rights because they wanted the rights of inheritance for their son. And so the biggest problem were actually men going against the Christian marriages, which is very, very interesting. And it was a discussion that was popping up with, what was it called, over at Medieval Irish Podcast over on Spotify, and also at Gone Medieval, which covers more of the English interpretation, that this was a huge problem throughout Europe, especially with merchants having multiple wives during the medieval period.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just sending a notification. I'm sending a notification. Well, the merchant class were always problematic, Especially, look at the Tudor period, where basically they just replaced the whole nobility.
They do, and that's also a huge problem in Japan as well, where the merchants end up replacing the poor samurai. And because the samurai are so uneducated about running administration, unless Yuki wants to run out there and give me a kick in the back of the head, a lot of samurai end up becoming umbrella. They can only fix the umbrellas and stuff, because umbrellas, obviously, it takes a bit of strength to fix them. And so a lot of samurai end up taking up jobs, setting up their own kind of umbrella shop and fixing umbrellas for a living. A huge, massive drop going from the samurai wage to an umbrella fixer wage during the early modern period, for sure. And I assume that's what happens over in England as well, especially since many of the English nobility that fought in the 100 Years' War and the Wars of the Roses end up owning lots of money to the merchants as well. So many of them ended up in debt and alcoholics as well, because they suffered from PTSD. So it was quite easy for the Tudors to... So it was very easy for the Tudors to replace the nobles that were constantly rebelling against the main administration and replace them with merchants who were more kind of willing to work with the administration, especially when they were making a whole load of money at the time.
Yeah, a large part of it too was that years of constant financing wars, armies. The merchant class in wealth had surpassed the nobility class in large number, apart from select families, obviously. But at least at the mid-level, you had large estated landholder families who were poor, who were and were forced to lease off their lands to creditors, etc. And a way to... Then you had these two things. You had a poor nobility class and you had a rich mercantile class who couldn't push any further than they already had in social, due to social barriers. So a way for them to break through this was to intermarry, and the mercantile family would sort of give them money, wealth, and with that, the nobility class would give the status to the mercantile family. And this happened in large numbers, especially in England during the Tudor period, which is why you see when anyone who sort of traces English nobility, you have a lot of families that claim Norman ancestry through, came across William the Conqueror. Actually, I think historians have only managed to track 12, I think it is. It's early double digits, maybe single digits, families who actually have a direct line to a Norman knight that came across with William the Conqueror. And
there's an interesting idea, like in England, for example, at the Battle of the Yellow Ford, one of the English captains who makes complete mess there was Percy. Now, Percy, his father was the Earl of Northumberland, I think. So was his grandfather. So was his elder brother. So was his great grandfather, going way, 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 way back. But this Percy, because he was, I don't know, the third or fourth son, and because his father and grandfather had both been executed by different Tudors, is just a captain, and he's been led by a nobody who's Henry Bagnall. But if you look at Spain and Portugal, they have this idea. It's in Portuguese it's fidalgo, in Spanish it's hidalgo. It means son of somebody. So you can be of noble blood in English, but because you're the second son of a second son of a second son, you're not noble. In Spain and Portugal, you are noble. You mightn't have any money, but you're still a fidalgo or hidalgo. So like you have this blood, which creates problems because these people don't want to work. To keep their honor, they can't do manual labor. So it creates all sorts of problems later with the emergence of capitalism. But it means that if you are descended from someone who came over with Richard the Conqueror, or in the Spanish who was involved in Reconquista, you're always going to be. All your children are going to be. It's an idea that doesn't exist in English. But in a way, you could say that in Gaelic Ireland it does exist, because, sort of, if you're the grandson of a Gaelic lord, you're always going to be a noble.
Yeah, there's a very famous interaction in the English Parliament or British Parliament. It was quite late on. Between Spencers, who are Princess Diana's family, who I believe are actually descendant of sheep merchants or sheep farmers.
I thought you were going to say sheep, just sheep.
Yeah. Well, far be it from me to quote where the British royal family comes from, but and I believe someone of a more noble status, hereditary status, sort of pulled up Percy and went, like, when your family were herding sheep, my family were ruling Northumberland or whatever. And he basically turned round to this noble and went, well, when my family were being loyal servants to the crown, your ancestor was being executed for, for being a rebellious lord, basically at the Battle of Towton or something. It was just basically saying, basically, I've always been a loyal person, but come from a loyal family. Your family were upstarts, and so a bit of noble quip there, royal quip. But actually, I wonder, and that's sort of touch on since we're touched on this. I touched on this before, but random. Did Wales do well with the Tudors in charge? I can't speak for Wales.
They were Tudors. Oh, sorry, they were Welsh.
well, I mean, they were highly anglicised, much like the Cromwells. But Henry VII and Henry VIII were certainly well aware of their aptitude from Anglesey lineage, and because their ancestor, who was a Welsh seneschal, is inadvertently became attached to the royal family through marriage. They did have a lot of Welsh influence in their court. They weren't anti-Welsh. They weren't. Obviously, they were the English crown, and I know that still included parts of all of Wales. But for all intents and purposes, much like British today, it's 90% English culture, and which is now more Western and European culture. But you know, they had to focus more on their largest populace, which was the English. But he had his cousins who were Welsh in court, and he wasn't. They weren't anti-Welsh. They were very aware of their Welsh heritage.
It's a funny one when it comes down to Henry VII because of the fact that the reason why he won the Battle of Bosworth and then was able to keep his crown was because the people of Wales believed he was the reincarnation of King Arthur. When he marched upon Richard III,
people of Wales or the Tudors afterwards decided that the people of Wales believed. I think
it was the excitement, though, going into the Battle of Bosworth.
Really care. So there was nobles.
I think with the excitement, with the excitement of Battle of Bosworth, because of the arrival of Henry VII onto it, there's at least a level of excitement. We're going to
excitement, and there's some excitement that if you don't get excited, your head gets chopped off.
Well, that's true as well. It can be very debated. Like even the fact that he did call his, and obviously, as you said there, the complete rewriting of history by Queen Elizabeth with the help of Shakespeare up around the, what was it called? The late 16th century. It's easy to make the counter argument there that it was all the rewriting of history. But at the same time, with the arrival of Henry VII going into the Battle of Bosworth, there is a level of excitement that, hey, look, this guy's pretty much the resurrection of King Arthur, finally usurping the Anglo-Saxons going into the Battle of Bosworth. So it's a funny one to even have a conversation about, but it's also interesting to also add the fact that Henry VII did call his first son King Arthur, so he even plays into that when it comes into the politics of naming his son at the time. It is definitely a funny one to talk about because the Welsh are so quickly to use that reference. And it's the same thing when you go into, what was it called? The Edward I, King of England, when he goes into Wales to crush all those rebellions, he straight away goes in to destroy as much as he can of Welsh link to King Arthur because of this whole idea of the Welsh coming in and usurping these Anglo-Saxons or even the Normans that go in there, that they're seen as just another bunch of foreigners. Would you agree or definitely disagree with that, Owen?
I agree in part.
Yeah.
Henry VII, Henry Tudor played up the Welsh thing to an extent. Henry VIII and Elizabeth didn't. They were not pro-Welsh at all. And afterwards, I think many Welsh writers, they would have bigged it up a lot. Everybody was rewriting history in those days. Everybody sort of like the story of King Arthur. It starts as Welsh, but it gets transformed by French or Provençal, like poets, etc., in the 12th century, and then it becomes something completely different. Like King Arthur, if he existed, the myth comes from someone who fought the English. Whereas he becomes, in early medieval times, he becomes English, essentially. And then the Henry VII founded a useful myth. And so his first son is called Arthur. I think his first son actually marries Catherine of Aragon and then dies. Because I think that's one of the arguments Henry VIII tried to use when he wanted to get rid of Catherine, that the marriage was not lawful because she had been married to his brother.
He
whereas, did. At the time they said the marriage wasn't consummated. Again, that's outside my area, but I just know that. So the Welsh thing is you have to be very careful with it. And the Tudors essentially they get rid of the independence of Wales by incorporating the principality. There's like sort of so they kill the independence of it.
Talking about the Tudors, I just want to dispel this little thing here. A lot of our forestry was cut away by Tudor periods, stopping our current nomad lifestyle. Actually, by the 1500s, most of our forestry was already heavily reduced. There wasn't a grand reasoning behind, for the wood kern or anything like that. Certainly, there were things put in place like the destruction of crannogs and other things to reduce rebellious actions. And the Tudor period is guilty of a lot of things, but actually, this is one of a few things that, like I say, the wooded. The myth that they basically cut down all our trees for their ships is, like I said, the woodlands were largely gone by the 1500s already.
To a great extent, but in the 17th century and 18th century, what's left are essentially cut down, not for the navy, but to burn as charcoal.
Yeah, plantations as well had a huge impact. Whenever planters were granted land, they cut down for farming as well.
Or for burning for charcoal.
Yeah.
So the good oak, a beautiful oak, and it's burnt.
Yeah. No, I know, but like, and then what they replace it with is non-native species as well, which is why Fermanagh, you go to places like I went to Fermanagh along the locks, and one of the guides was sort of pointing out areas, the lovely lush woodland from the boat, but he was explaining that none of it was native. None of it was native trees, so it was actually quite harmful to the surrounding area. I think that we are sort of getting to the closer time. I do owe Davey a comment here, and I think it's a suggestion for maybe next week. He had an idea that I was quite interested in. What if Ireland or the Irish had won the 9 Years' War? I would really like to spend maybe the first part of our next live just sort of maybe dissecting a bit of the what if. David mentioned it, and I said I would approach you guys with the idea. I thought it was a great idea for a discussion.
Yeah, sounds like a brilliant one, especially since we have Dr. O'Neill on.
So I think maybe next week we can just we'll obviously go into normal clan histories, surname histories, other histories as well. Tonight we didn't really go into it, but we had so much to talk about with it being Easter.
That's it.
But
we went into saint histories in greater detail than I've ever
no.
And then
was it what I was planning?
I'm sorry for not knowing about Saint Finbar of Cork, and I really should because my brother is Finbar. One of my brothers. They don't teach him in Dublin or in Kerry, so there's.
It's mostly University College of Cork under, what was it, at the time when I was doing university back in 2015, it was under Dr. Damien Bracken, covered St. Finbar's. I don't think you had Dr. Damien Bracken on, did you?
No.
For any of your classes?
No.
So yeah, if you want to learn more about St. Finbar's and you do plan on going to university, go under Dr. Damien Bracken. You could literally talk all day about the saints. He also specializes in St. Columbanus, Dr. Damien Bracken, but he's probably a professor. He's probably Professor Damien Bracken at this point. Insanely, exceptionally one of the best lecturers in Ireland for sure, in my opinion, but maybe I'm a little bit biased. But yes, we have another 2 minutes there, lads. So get in your last minute of questions there and we'll cover that as we slowly start to wrap up. Also on top of that, lads, if anybody's jumping onto the classes and stuff over on my Patreon, I'm off for this weekend because of Easter, but I'm going to return on the 12th if you're living over in Ireland and America, on the 12th, and if you're living over in the Pacific, over in Australia or Japan or the Philippines, it'll be on the 13th for you guys. I'll return with the classes, and I'm going to start covering presentations on the Scottish War of Independence. So if you're into the Scottish War of Independence, head on over to my Patreon at Irish Medieval History. It's about 20 quid a month, where I'll be covering classes on the Scottish War of Independence. So if you're into that kind of stuff, but you need to learn about the Scottish War of Independence, and you've always been interested into movies like Braveheart or The Outlaw King, and you want to learn more about this really important part of our history, definitely head on over to Patreon. And it's only about 20 quid a month for a whole load of presentations that I give live with questions and answers as well. Okay, guys, but that's not happening this weekend. I'm off for this weekend. Michal, do you have any plans for this weekend or this week or anything, or are you taking this weekend off like myself?
No, I've taken enough time off. I'll be releasing a Walsh video for a short. And then Wednesday is my live. So if you want to know your clan histories, locations, family histories, that's just me on a Wednesday. Come across. I normally do a topic with my members as well. So, but that's 9 p.m. Dublin time on Wednesday. It's every second week. And then obviously to those on TikTok who are asking when our next live is, again, it's every Saturday with these two fine fellows at 9 p.m. Dublin time as well. So but if you want to support channel, if you've mentioned a name, especially on TikTok, if you've mentioned a name and I didn't get to it, check to see if the name is already covered in my channel, in my shorts. And then if not, just put a comment below and I'll add it to the list. Or reach out to me. I'll try and share what information I know. But to support the channel, just like, and share the videos with your family and friends, and just comment away. Thanks very much.
Every day. And Owen, any plans for this week? Anything you have coming up, or any way we can support your channel as well?
Yeah, I'm going through a bit of a family difficulties with my mother at the moment, so I'm being tied up. But I have written a video about history and pseudo history. I've written the script almost. So hopefully at the end of next week, that will be coming out. I might get out a couple of shorts. But things are a bit complicated to be doing stuff at the moment. I'll be on this always. I'm up in my mother's house at the moment. And if you want to, I have a buy me a coffee account, buymeacoffee.com/Forrest Fassa, if you want to make any contribution there.
Happy days. A lot of the questions are coming in. What we'll do, actually, because they're actually covering the topic for next week, which is what would happen if Hugh O'Neill had won the 9 Years' War. A lot of those questions are actually that you guys are asking right now would be better suited for next weekend. So if you guys want those questions answered, tune in next weekend where we have the time, we can get into way more detail next weekend. We'll take note of it now and we'll actually answer it next weekend. So that will be on
cliffhanger.
What was it called? The 12th. Go on there.
A cliffhanging ending for once.
Yeah.
Tune in next week.
Tune in next week.
What's this? Yeah. We'll leave it on the cliffhanger. Is there any other questions you guys want to answer in the comment section before I wrap it up there?
No, I think it's fine.
Because a lot of these questions we can easily answer next week.
Yeah, I think a lot of these are for
okay, lads. So that's what we'll do. We'll take note of your questions now, or definitely bring your questions over for next week, which will be this time next week. So definitely pop in there. Other than that, guys,